Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, major news. I have a lot to go into today, but I want to start with breaking news. The FBI has raided Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, and this is going to have some pretty serious reverberations, I would say. And you're already starting to see some of that happen. Now, I want to start today's episode just by going over the breaking news and where things are at with that. Then I want to go into what's happening with the IRS, the weaponization of the IRS. The IRS very soon is going to be larger than the entire Defense Department, apparently. And what that means for Americans also, as the Democrats are rolling out this bill, allegedly to help, bail us out of inflation by repeating many of the same things that got us into the inflation problem in the first place, and creating a financial surplus by really making the IRS a much larger entity that will target not only, they say, wealthy Americans, but it's going to go more so after middle-income Americans. And with that as well, frankly, bring in less money projected than even some of the recent spending bills, some of the recent bailouts. Some pretty serious stuff, folks. I'm going to be going over this today. We also have Luke Coffey with us, so we'll bring him in a bit later. Luke Coffey was the individual, you might have seen the documentary we did, The Real Story of January 6th. Right? Luke Coffey's the individual, the cowboy hat right there, and he was the one who held up the crutches at the door, the entrance to the Capitol building where Roseanne Boylan died, and by doing so, he allowed the crowd to pull Roseanne out from that tunnel. Unfortunately, they were not able to save her, even though they tried to. So Luke has a very, very incredible story, so we'll have him with us. Folks, let's start off by talking about the breaking news, because I know a lot of you are probably wondering what's going on right now. So basically, let me show you what Epoch Times is reporting, just to show you where things are at. It says FBI has raided Mar-a-Lago. The property is under siege, according to Trump. People were live streaming it last night. Basically, FBI raided the building. Police were all outside. There were some protesters there, kind of there more so, I think, support Trump. Let's go over what it's saying first, though. It says, former President Donald Trump said his Florida Mar-a-Lago home is under siege and occupied by a group of FBI agents in a statement late August 8th. And Trump said, these are dark times for our nation, as my beautiful home, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, is currently under siege, raided, and occupied by a large group of FBI agents. Trump said this on Truth Social. He said, after working and cooperating with the relevant government agencies, this unannounced raid on my home was not necessary or appropriate. The alleged raid by the FBI came 2 days after Trump's latest hint at a 2024 run. That was recently at CPAC. Actually, I spoke there the same day as Trump, in fact, in which he stopped short of giving an official announcement. And continues, Trump said, well, it's not a long period regardless, whether you go before or after. Certainly not a very long time. Talking about whether he's going to run for president. He said, it's coming, and I think that people are going to be very happy. Our country has never been in a position like this. We lost everything. We lost energy independence. We lost our prestige. We've lost every single thing you can lose. And now, on this as well, Trump's lawyer, Christina Bobb, confirmed with CNN on Monday night that the FBI seized documents from Mar-a-Lago and said as well that, quote, President Trump and his legal team have been cooperating with FBI and DOJ officials every step of the way. The FBI did conduct an unannounced raid and seized paper. The FBI has not responded to us for a request to comment. Now, Trump also noted that they broke into his safe, suggesting that, I don't know how you break into a safe. Maybe they could crack the code, or maybe they broke into it, like in a literal sense. It's not clear which. But right now, basically, it's not clear whether this is about January 6th, the investigation into that, and whether they want to try to incriminate Trump for his involvement with it, his alleged involvement with it, or whether this is about tax information or just something else entirely. There's very little details out right now on exactly what they're doing, why they did it, or whatever else. Trump has not been arrested. At least there's been no reports of that. Trump has been releasing statements. He's been talking publicly, at least on Truth Social. And so it seems that that's kind of where things are at. Given this situation, though, it's actually causing some pretty big stirs on the conservative side. One of the big stirs is actually people trying to push Trump to announce his run for presidency. Because if he does that, if Trump does announce he's running for president, it'll be very difficult for the FBI to go after him, at least in terms of trying to arrest him or trying to charge him with crimes. But we'll see if he does that, because I think he wanted to wait till after the midterms, because he wants to put the focus, of course, on the candidates for the midterms, not on his presidential run. And my personal sense is that he doesn't want to announce anything beforehand, basically because he doesn't want to mess up the midterms, essentially. He doesn't want to throw people under the bus as they're trying to run for the midterms. The Democrats, I believe, would have that in their interest. This is my personal analysis. Because if for example, Trump waits till after the midterms, they might be able to prosecute him, they might press charges against him, and they might take that route, which will prevent him from running for president in 2024. Now, Republicans are pretty well projected to retake the House and even maybe the Senate in the midterms. If they do that, they can basically block Biden from doing almost anything. It's not likely they'll do more than that. Pretty much Biden will become a lame duck president if the Republicans gain control of either house, either the House of Representatives or the Senate. Now, that is one side. The other side is if Trump announces prior to that, which means that he basically risks throwing the people under the bus who are trying to run. If it goes that direction, right? If it goes in that direction, then basically Trump could still run in 2024, but he risks maintaining a state where the Democrats actually control maybe the same amount of seats, maybe even more. We'll have to see. And so I think it's kind of the Democrats have found a strategy to try to, mess him up one way or the other, essentially. Now, will this work? We'll have to see, because already we're seeing that basically it's kind of blowing up in their faces, frankly. And it actually could have some pretty serious reverberations in terms of even how states govern. And I'm going to explain why this matters so much. First, so folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data or activity, but now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure's server and data center, Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Secure does not ask for your phone number, it does not mine your data or upload your contacts. It functions by adding people you know, then adding their secure numbers, and you can still chat with non-secure users by sending them an invite. Secure protects you from hackers getting onto your phone. You also have privacy while you're on the app. Now, it's $5 for the messenger, $7 for the email, or $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. Now, let me show you some of the responses there have been in terms of people coming out in support of Trump and condemning what has been taking place. Now, first of all, this is Twitter Representative Paul Gosar in Arizona. Now, he says this: The FBI raid on Trump's home tells us one thing: failure is not an option. We must destroy the FBI. We must save America. I stand with Donald J. Trump. Now, Paul Gosar's sentiments, I think, are some of the more common ones. Basically, people are believing now that the FBI is pretty much working like a criminal cartel, the way it's being framed, and that, of course, the agency, the Department of Justice itself, basically has been weaponized as a political arm, more so of the Democratic Party. Now, they're conducting trials, conducting investigations into the American people, including even trying to label Americans, even historical, like they're even saying like the "Don't Tread on Me" flag is now an extremist symbol, for example. And, of course, even Americans who are attending these school board meetings and making, pretty much standing against what they're saying there, were allegedly being investigated by the FBI as potential terrorists. This is kind of a line being drawn, essentially, and people, I think, are concerned that the Department of Justice basically has become radicalized in and of itself, and by becoming radicalized, basically the FBI is becoming the armed wing, essentially, of the Democratic Party because they control, again, the federal government, and the FBI essentially works as, a federal law enforcement branch. If they want to declare that someone should be investigated, they're investigated. If they want to declare someone should be raided, they get raided. And if they want to protect someone like Hunter Biden, they get protected. This is really kind of a two-tier justice system. A lot of pressure is also now on Merrick Garland, and a lot of people are calling him out for basically becoming basically using the hands of justice as a political tool. Which could come back and bite him, frankly. We'll see how that plays out. Let me show you a clip now. Jim Jordan, representative again, Jim Jordan also came out with some pretty strong statements. Let me show you his clip on Twitter as well.
Republicans promise a lot of accountability, but a lot of times we're disappointed. Is that going to change now?
It is going to change, and I appreciate the leader's statement, and that's exactly what needs to happen. But even before that, this Friday, we're going back to vote on this stupid bill that the Democrats passed out of the Senate yesterday. So we will be there all day Friday. I'll be in Thursday night. Merrick Garland, Chris Wray, come to the House Judiciary Committee this Friday and answer our questions about this action today, which has never happened in American history. What was on the warrant? What were you really doing? What were you looking for? Why not talk to President Trump and have him give the information you're after? This is unbelievable. And understand the history here. 1 year ago, it was the Merrick Garland using the Patriot Act against parents. 1 day ago, it was 87,000 agents in a bill the Democrats passed to go harass Americans from the IRS. And today, we have the raid of a former president's home in America. So, heck, we deserve answers now, and this Friday would be a good time. Jerry Nadler, call up Christopher Wray, call up Merrick Garland, bring him in front of the House Judiciary Committee so we can ask them the questions that the American people deserve answers to.
That's Representative Jim Jordan. Let me show you one more. This is Twitter as well, and this is a Florida politician, Representative Anthony Sabatini. He's saying something interesting. He's saying it's time for us in the Florida legislature to call an emergency legislative session and amend our laws regarding federal agencies. Sever all ties with DOJ immediately. Any FBI agent conducting law enforcement functions outside the purview of our state should be arrested upon sight. Now, what he's talking about is actually very serious. This is, again, a Florida representative, and something actually a lot of people are asking DeSantis to do right now, which is basically declare and amend the laws there in Florida to make it so that basically the FBI cannot operate. Now, this is actually in line with traditional constitutional law enforcement. You actually do have a movement right now in the United States. You actually do have a movement right now in the United States that would do something very much like this, which is basically restoring the constitutional systems of justice. Now, how does that work? Remember, first of all, the FBI was created under executive order. Technically, the FBI is not in any way a traditional law enforcement branch, although I think during the Cold War it did serve a pretty good function, frankly. The issue is that people argue that it's been pretty much subverted since then and no longer serves the function it used to. Now, the FBI functions as a federal-level law enforcement branch, but under traditional American law, pretty much the main law enforcement branch was the sheriffs, and the sheriff could appoint deputies. The sheriff is an elected official. It does not have to answer to the president, does not have to answer to the mayor, doesn't have to answer to the governor. The sheriff answers to the American people, and the sheriff can choose to enforce laws, choose to go after things as they see fit. The standard which they go by is just the Constitution. So if they feel that a law violates the Constitution, they don't have to enforce that law, which is why, for example, you had a lot of sheriffs refusing to enforce red flag laws. You had a lot of sheriffs saying they won't enforce the lockdowns. You might remember during the lockdowns with COVID, Now, if Florida were to take this step that actually it's being pushed to take, and even the Florida state legislature is looking to take, what this would mean basically is that if the FBI tried enforcing the law on the ground, the sheriffs could arrest those agents. Now, I believe would be a 10th. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this would be a 10th Amendment issue. There were cases won on this in the past. But basically, the federal government cannot bypass the sheriffs to enforce law. The sheriffs actually do have the ability to draw a line for the federal government, and the federal government cannot bypass the sheriffs. If Florida were to take this stance, it would be more of a constitutional stance. Now, you might remember we had an interview recently with a group of sheriffs that are going constitutional. There's currently 6 of them across the U.S. That was Richard Mack. Check it. It was a recent interview to Richard Mack, if you want to watch it, where he explains some of this. And actually, he won a Supreme Court case specifically on this. Again, I believe it was the 10th Amendment case. So Florida would have the ability to do this. Florida could do this. And if they were to do that, and if Trump were residing in Florida, even the FBI could not arrest him. If they did try, they could be arrested. The FBI agents themselves could be arrested by the sheriffs. Now, that'll be a very strong stance. We'll see if that happens. But that's something that is being pushed for right now. Now, on kind of my take on this, I want to give you before we go into some more stories. My take on this is, frankly, we're watching something that's happened in history, folks, just being blunt. I've mentioned a few times a book called Rape of the Mind, which talks about menticide. Menticide is being just like homicide, right? The killing of a man. Menticide is the killing of the mind. And you see correlations on many fronts, whether it's COVID, whether it's January 6th, whether it's the way the Department of Justice is behaving right now as we speak, with things that the Soviet Union did and what the Nazis did. And I'm not saying this is like a name-calling thing. I mean it in the most literal sense in terms of actual policy. The Nazis were doing things like this. And let me show you a quote from that book. Actually, one of my good friends sent it to me as well. So let me show you this. It says, this is, again, Dr. Just A. Merleau, The Rape of the Mind, The Psychology of Thought, Menticide, and Brainwashing. Let me read this to you. It says, the totalitarian has taught us that the courts and the judiciary can be used as tools of thought control. That is why we have to study how our own institutions, intentionally or unobtrusively, may be used to distort our concepts of democratic freedom. The downfall of justice to a psychologist, perhaps the most interesting aspect of the Moscow purge trials between 1936 and 1938. I would compare the J6 trials to the Moscow purge trials, by the way, was the deep sense of moral shock felt by people all over the world, whose trust in the judicial process was shaken to its foundations by these perversions of justice. Discussions about the trials always concern themselves less with the question of guilt of innocence of the accused than with the horrifying travesty of justice the trials presented. Somewhere deep in the soul of men lies the conviction that a judge is, by definition, a righteous, impartial man, that an appeal to the courts is the road to truth, that the law stands above corruption. In other words, what we're witnessing right now is basically a repeat, frankly, of the Moscow purge trials. And even beyond that, frankly, it looks like the Democrats are just following I mean, it sounds crazy, but they're following the Nazi model of how Hitler rose to power, which was, again, the burning of the Reichstag, and then, purge trials afterwards, just like the Soviets did. This is a well laid out plan, one that has worked for totalitarian regimes in the past, as they took the road to gain more power and gather more power to themselves. The Nazis did this, the Soviets did this, the Chinese Communist Party did this. It's a well-used, well-trotted method that, again, frankly, the Democrats, it's almost like they just pulled out the playbook and they're just going step by step. If you know the history, it's shocking, actually, but shocking but expected. I would, again, highly recommend that book. It's a classic by Merleau. That's The Rape of the Mind. I think in the times we're in, it's nice to look back on history because, frankly, you can just see that history is repeating itself. That being said, though, things can be done. One thing that's different about America compared to Germany, ahead of the Nazis during the Weimar Republic, or whether it's the Soviet Union during the time of Tsarist Russia, or the Chinese Communist Party, which was really in a state of anarchy. You had two competing systems, the communist and the Kuomintang. The country's in a state of anarchy. The United States is a very unique system of government, one that you don't find anywhere else in the world. And this is the reason why that is. Basically, the founding fathers of the United States set up several tiers within our system. You can basically control almost the whole country. You can control the federal government. You can control both the House and the Senate. You can even technically control the Supreme Court and still not be able to govern things at the local level. Because America, basically, it's closer in history, at least, to more like an empire, where you have, of course, the emperor who rules the empire, which is a collection of states. Each state then has its own king and its own system. In the United States, of course, we have the federal government, which manages the entire country, but you also have individual states, each of which is managed almost like its own country, with its own system of government, its own court, sometimes its own constitution, sometimes even its own military. Every level of our system, from the executive branch to the legislative branch to the judicial branch, at the federal level, down to the way the state legislatures work, down to the way the sheriff works, every one of these levels works as a check and balance to ensure that the Constitution is not being violated. And the Constitution goes a long way to ensure basic rights and even lays out ways on which each level could fight back against totalitarianism. It's a pretty incredible system, actually, if you get into the details of it. And frankly, I think we've never seen it work. I don't think in history we've ever seen it work to the degree we're now watching it work, where the federal government is, in fact, trying to manage the country like a communist state, frankly. What is being discussed in Florida to even have the sheriffs basically arrest FBI agents if they try to do something like this again, I think is a very clear indicator of that. All right, folks, that said, here a Katie Endreffi, you said, read The Naked Communist, authored by Skousen in 1958, that lists the 45 communist goals to take down America. All but the 45th has come to pass. And I have a copy of that book on my bookshelf at home. Another classic, and even if you don't read that whole book, folks, do a Google search for the 45 goals of communism. This was a document, I believe, that was allegedly captured by Allied soldiers during World War II, if I remember it right. It was never fully proven that they captured it. You can only verify something like that to such an extent. But you can look at it and you can see that they've accomplished, as Katie notes, all but the 45th goal. I do highly recommend just Googling the 45 goals of communism. It's a quick read, and I think you'll find it a bit shocking, but I think important to know. All right, folks, that said, let's jump over to Epic TV, and I want to go into what's happening with the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not fully passed yet, but it's on the road to being passed. We'll see if they actually do it. Basically, the Manchin sided with Schumer. They passed it on some level so far. We'll see if they manage to get this all the way through. It's looking like right now they might get it all the way through, although we will see. There is some serious pushback on it. Even Bernie Sanders is saying pretty much it's basically a socialist wish list. But even Bernie Sanders is criticizing it. So we'll see what happens with it. It's on its road to being passed, but again, we will see. Before we jump over, let me show you a quick trailer. This is Devin Nunes, and he's saying Congress must investigate the Department of Justice, the FBI, and beyond in November. And this is Cash's Corner.
This is something that we never knew could even exist, that you could somehow get a contractor that could become politicized to go out and use the powers of the state to essentially spy on your political opponents. I mean, that's what happened.
What do you expect the world to learn from the Danchenko prosecution? That is incredibly unusual. That's like the AG trying a case.
Yeah.
So I guess he's going big.
The fact that you've got these folks with high-level, high-security clearances getting government contracts.
How do you go after them?
There's going to have to be an investigation like none that's ever been done before, directly at the Department of Justice and everything below.
Yeah, folks. Again, that's Cash's Corner. Now, folks, I'm going to jump over to Epic TV. I'm going to go into what's happening with this, the weaponization of the IRS, this new, inflation reduction bill that does not reduce inflation. I'll explain. We're also going to have Luke Coffey on, again, from a documentary, The Real Story of January 6th, to talk about some of his story. So come join us. This will be on Epic TV. We do an hour-and-a-half show every day. So come join us now. We'll switch over. All right, folks, thank you for being here.